Hello and welcome to Fast Forward with V. Sriram. Today we are going to look at the history of the lighthouses of Chennai. This is, after all, a port city, and this is where ships have come from a very long time, so we have a lighthouse. But then, when you look at it, we have had 4 lighthouses, not just one. Let us see what is the story behind all these lighthouses. The English came to Madras in 1639 and built Fort St. George. Their ships began to come here for trade. All the ships used to stop 2 miles in the sea in a place called Madras Roads, to which catamarans would row, carrying goods and passengers, bringing back goods and passengers. And that is how the trade was conducted for almost 160 years. It was only in 1795 that the British merchants inside Fort St. George put up a proposal requesting that a lighthouse had to be constructed. The principal reason was that there were a number of dangerous shoals all around this Madras coast, and many ships would go and get stuck in the sand in those shoals. And in order to prevent it, they wanted a lighthouse to be constructed. In the 1790s, the British rarely ever stepped out of Fort St. George. And therefore, if a lighthouse had to be built, it had to be only inside the fort. So the search began for a suitable location, preferably a tall building on top of which the lighthouse could be constructed, so that money on construction could be saved. The Church of St. Mary's became the most suitable choice. But the governor, Lord Hobart, said that without the permission of the pastor of the church, this could not be done. A letter was therefore sent, but the pastors refused permission, saying that theirs was a religious spot and therefore it had no place for a commercial enterprise like a lighthouse. The search therefore was resumed for a suitable location. And this time they zeroed in on the Exchange Building, which is today known as the Fort Museum. That was where the merchants of Fort St. George met to conduct their trade. They used to have a clear view of the sea right in front of them. They would be able to see the ships coming in. They would be able to see the catamarans rowing. They would be able to see the goods that are being offloaded onto the beach. And therefore, all their trade was conducted in this building. It was therefore considered appropriate that the lighthouse should be constructed on top of the Exchange Building. In 1795, work began on a wooden tower, 75 feet in height, on top of which a 6-foot chamber was built in which oil lamps would be placed. There would be 12 oil lamps, 5 in the lowermost row, 4 in the intermediate row, 3 in the topmost row. And from here, mirrors at the back of the lamps would reflect the light onto the sea, and it would be visible at some distance. This therefore became the first lighthouse, and it was inaugurated on November 21st, 1796 by Governor Lord Hobart. A wooden structure standing on top of a building did not have much chance in cyclone and in rain. And every time the Chennai weather turned a little bad, the lighthouse suffered damage. The lamps would be extinguished, the chimneys would crack, the tower itself was becoming weaker, and in 1807, a severe cyclonic storm damaged the tower quite a bit, and it had to be practically reconstructed. By the 1830s, the cry began for a fresh lighthouse to be constructed in the city. But by this time, the British had begun to leave Fort St. George and build their houses and their commercial establishments at various parts of the city. Most of the important industrial houses had their offices to the north of the fort on a street that was known as First Line Beach, and today we recognize it as Rajaji Salai. Parry and Company was the first to move, which is why that corner is even today known as Parry's Corner. How office of the customs was also shifted to the same road, and therefore the harbour itself shifted there. It was therefore decided that the new lighthouse should be constructed close to that spot, and land was allocated for it. Lieutenant J.T. Smith was given the task of constructing the new lighthouse. He initially envisaged a brick tower 175 feet in height, topped by lamps, 24 of them in number, and with an oscillating mechanism. Smith gave an estimation of 18,000 rupees for the construction of the tower. The government hemmed and hawed over it, and finally it was only in 1840 that the approvals came. Then wisdom dawned on everybody that given the harsh weather in this city, a brick tower was unlikely to last for very long, and therefore it was decided that a granite tower would have to be constructed, and that pushed up the cost several times, the new estimate coming to 60,000 rupees and odd. This was approved, and Lieutenant Smith, who became Captain Smith and then became Major Smith, he got involved in the construction along with his assistant, Captain Ludlow. The actual work was done by sappers in the Indian Army and also convicts from the Madras prison. Work began in 1841 and continued till end 1843. On 1st January 1844, the second lighthouse was inaugurated, operating with 24 lamps. And that would remain the lighthouse till the 1890s. In the 1860s, Madras got a high court, and then a new building had to be constructed for it. The site was just behind the second lighthouse. With design by Henry Irwin, the work began, and finally the High Court was completed in 1892. The tallest dome of the High Court being 190 feet in height and standing just behind the second lighthouse. When the ships began coming into the harbour, they became very confused because you had a lighthouse at 175 feet. Just behind it, you had a dome which was also illuminated, and there was a lot of confusion as to where the lighthouse exactly was, and the captains of ships began to complain. In 1892, therefore, the government decided that it would shift the lighthouse from the tall column and move it to the top of the High Court itself. In 1894, therefore, the third lighthouse of Madras came up on the tallest dome of the High Court. And that was to remain the lighthouse of the city till 1977. On 22nd September 1914, just after the First World War began, the German ship Emden was cruising just outside the harbour. The city had gone to sleep, but the lighthouse was very much on, showering its brilliant light and encouraging the Emden to come in. The Emden came into the harbour and fired shells on the city. The oil tanks that contained petroleum immediately caught fire and caused enormous chaos. There was panic in the city. Shells fell at all kinds of places, but the Emden was here just for half an hour or so before it sailed away. But it left behind an everlasting legacy. Even today, the word Emden in Tamil means a bully, an evil person. This lighthouse would continue to function till the 1960s, and then talk began on a fourth lighthouse for the city. A spot was identified opposite the University Senate House on the Marina Beach. But even before work began in 1968, the then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, C.N. Annadurai, passed away, and that land was allocated to build his samadhi. And therefore, a new spot was needed for the lighthouse. It was identified just south of the original location at the corner of Mylapore, and work began in the mid-1970s, being completed in 1977. The new lighthouse would be 150 feet in height. It functions even today. I remember as a child, I must have been 6 in 1972, when my father took me in a car and we drove down to First Line Beach to see the third lighthouse of the city functioning on top of the High Court building. I can remember it as though it happened yesterday. In the darkness of the night, the light of the lighthouse revolving and throwing its light all around the city. That was the magic and mystery of the third lighthouse. And today we have the fourth lighthouse that functions even now. Even as all these lighthouses were coming up, technology was advancing. The first lighthouse was using coconut oil. The second lighthouse used coconut oil and towards the end of its life was using kerosene oil. The third lighthouse was using kerosene oil and then went on to use mineral oil. The fourth lighthouse functions on electricity. That is progress for you. 4 lighthouses in our city. You can see the fourth lighthouse anytime you want. The third lighthouse, even today, if you stand outside the High Court and look up at the tallest dome, you can see the arrangements for the lighthouse even now. The second lighthouse is still standing as that Doric column inside the High Court compound. Of the first lighthouse, we don't have a single pictorial representation. We can only guess as to what it looked like. Such are the wonders of history. I'll be back with you with more interesting stories in the weeks to come. Bye for now.